Welcome to the elegant and beautiful Gulbanu Premji Library. Thank you for being here for this event. We truly appreciate it. We are glad to be here for the launch of Dr. C.K. Mathew's book, Reviewing the Republic, Reflections on the Constitution of India, a book which has been written to provide us with a holistic view of the purpose, philosophy, and history of the Constitution of India. The book examines critical subjects like the philosophy of our preamble, the nature of our union, and many more. We are extremely fortunate to be in the midst of accomplished stalwarts as our esteemed guests for this book launch. So for the next 90 minutes, we will hear our authors speak. We will have the formal book launch, and our esteemed guests on the dais will be sharing their reflections about the book. So let's begin. Please allow me to invite Professor Sitharamam, Director of the School of Policy and Governance, to introduce and welcome our guests.
A very warm welcome to the esteemed invitees and those who are on the dais and who are in the audience. It's an important and significant moment for Azim Premji University in terms of taking a step forward in the publication of important themes and important issues that are pertinent to this country in the current times. And in doing so, I suppose we have a very esteemed visiting professor with the university who has already done an important work a few years ago on the office of the district collector, the history evolution. And today we have his second work produced from within the university's affiliation, which is the Reviewing the Republic. As a student of law and society, I know that there has been an explosion of interest in the theme of constitutionalism globally. In the last 20-25 years, there are numerous important works have been published. Within the Indian context, in the last 10 years alone, I can count more than half a dozen books on the Indian Constitution has been published. I think there is a resurgence of interest ranging from history to the contemporary sort of context, including the major Oxford handbook on the Indian Constitution. But one major difference between those works and the work that we are launching today is all the earlier works that I referred to have been written by either esteemed academics in the field of law and legal studies or practitioners of law, either judges or the lawyers in the courtroom. Today's work from that vantage point is very different. Very different because it is written by a practitioner of constitutional governance. So the insights that a practitioner of governance would bring in is rare in the way that we have seen the reflections on the constitutional understanding of its normative framework. I think there are different perspectives possible, and I think the perspective that Professor Mathew brings to us is certainly something very unique from that understanding. So I therefore say it's a very proud moment for the university to launch a book that has a new kind of a genre in understanding constitutionalism, the functioning of the Constitution, and its political, social, and ethical moral significance in our society. In that sort of thing, I would say that while we need many more books on the Constitution, both from academics as well as practitioners of law, I would say that we need a lot more contributions from the practitioners of constitutional governance. I think we should hope that this trend that Dr. Mathew has started with our university would also give a fillip to a variety of other administrative officers would come and bring their own perspectives on the administration, governance, and constitutional frameworks that they would perceive as important. In that context, I'm very privileged to welcome two distinguished officers of the Indian Administrative Service who are our chief guest and guest of honor today. Shri Shumsher Sharif and Shri V. Srinivas. They both have kindly agreed to our request to come and reflect on Dr. Mathew's work and say what their view on the book is. And I think, I'm sure they will bring also an insight from their own personal contributions in the area of constitutional governance as well in doing this particular reflection. Without much ado, let me just do the honors. I have the honor of introducing the speakers. I'm not fully, I have forgotten to ask who is first and who is next, but I'm just going with what is there with me. So I will introduce first Mr. Shumsher Sharif, and then I will go on to introduce Mr. Srinivas. Shri Shumsher Sharif joined civil service in 1977. He studied at St. Stephen's College. He also is an alumnus of Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Also JFK School of Governance, Harvard University. He was the first Indian graduate from the École Nationale Administration in France, which is a very prominent college of administrative services in France, for those who are familiar. He has served for over 40 years, and including in areas of Northeast, Finance Ministry. He was Principal Secretary in Delhi, Chief Secretary, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and also he was on the Advisory Board of Directors of Asian Development Bank during that time. He was also Secretary to two Vice Presidents and Secretary to the President of India. And just to say that he also is on the Executive Committee of the Association of Secretaries General of Parliaments in Switzerland, and he has also received the lifetime honorary membership of the association in 2018. Sir, we are very honored to have you here for your kind reflections here. Shri V. Srinivas is currently the Secretary to Government of India, Department of Administrative Reforms and Public Grievances, and also Department of Pension and Pensioners' Welfare. He represents India on the Council of Administration of the International Institute of Administrative Sciences, Brussels. In terms of his earlier career, he served as various capacities he served as Additional Secretary, Joint Secretary within these departments that I have indicated. And he was also advisor to Executive Director of India in the International Monetary Fund during 2003 and 2006. And he represented India on the International Cotton Advisory Committee. And then he held additional charge as Director General, National Center for Good Governance between 20 and 22, and Director General of National Archives in 2013-2014. Shri Srinivas also is recipient of a number of awards, and I'm just, for the sake of time, I'm just making only few selected sort of references to it. He has been recipient of Digital India Award in 2020 for e-office. He is also AIMS Leadership Excellence Award received in 2017. He is also a recipient of Indian Council of World Affairs Fellowships for writing 2 books. Shri Srinivas, interestingly, also already written 3 important volumes. So one is India's relations with the International Monetary Fund, which is one book that he has written. The second one is on G20 at 2023, The Roadmap to India's Presidency. And his third work is on the March to New India, Governance Transformed 2014-2019. He has authored also numerous articles, I suppose running into dozens and hundreds, so therefore I'm not making further mentioning of it. Sir, we are very, very grateful for you to come all the way and for your reflections. So with that brief introduction of our honorable speakers today, I invite Dr. Mathew.
Following the tradition at the university to felicitate our guests by presenting them with shawls, may I invite Manoj, the CEO of the Azim Premji University, to please do the honors. Thank you, Manoj. While reading portions of the book and absorbing many facets to the process of writing a book on the genesis of the Indian Constitution and the creation of the document, I was intrigued. And I had a lot of questions. And I asked Dr. Mathew that I have so many questions and I need answers too. So he says, why don't you wait for the book launch? So may I please invite Dr. Mathew to share his insights with us.
At the outset, let me express my very profound gratitude to the university for having taken up this project, and specifically to Mr. Anurag Behad, who was good enough to write the foreword to this book. I must also thank Manoj for having given the approvals, and Sudesh, I wonder if he is here, yeah, for putting together a team that brought out this wonderful product. And in that team, I must mention Sachin, I must mention Mrs. Chandrika, who slogged over this book line by line, corrected it, proof edited it. And her two young colleagues, Palak and Siljar, I don't know if they are here today. Yeah, okay. Thank you guys. Special thanks to Srinivas and Sharif. They have already been introduced. But on a personal note, Srinivas was a junior colleague of mine in Rajasthan, one of the most brilliant officers the state has seen, himself an author of 3 or 4 books, and has always been a good friend to me. In fact, my first book was also released by him, the book on the district collector. And thank you once again for coming. Only on a single phone call, he was good enough to come here. Sharif is an old batchmate, old meaning old. We were together since 1977, and I wanted him to come for this function particularly. For a book on the Constitution, you will not find a more suitable person. He has worked in 3 constitutional offices: the office of the Vice President, the office of the President, and Secretary General of the Rajya Sabha, where he was managing hundreds of unruly MPs and bringing discipline into the House. So I'm really thankful to you, Sharif, for coming here. Let me confess that I am not a law student. I am not a constitutional expert. And though I have spent about 37 years in government, I really did not know the Constitution until now. In the last 2-3 years, we're working on it. So the first question I have to ask myself and to answer to you is the first line of the foreword written by Mr. Anurag Behad himself. The first line of the foreword is, why another book on the Constitution? There are hundreds of books in the market. What am I producing new or saying something new? So I had to grapple with this question and came up with a muddled answer. It's not very convincing, but I'm going to try to say it here. And I understood that the reason is more emotional than intellectual. You know, I was born just 4 years after the Constitution came into being. That makes me ancient. And some of my colleagues here, we are really ancient now. But I would like to introduce my colleagues who are sitting here and thank them also for coming. Shumsher, you already know. But I also like to introduce Dali Uman Koshi, who went on to become Director of the National Institute of Designs in Ahmedabad and MD of the Apparel Export Corporation. Joy Uman here, who was Chief Secretary of Chhattisgarh, and P.K. Pradhan, who was Union Health Secretary in various important positions in the government. So when I said I was just 4 years old, it means something. To me, it appeared that although we were not there when the freedom movement was going on, but we could see the generation before us, my father's generation, who were completely involved in that great transition of power. I remember my father telling me how he used to boycott classes to take part in the Quit India movement and go and shout slogans outside the collector's office. How he himself saw the Union Jack coming down and the Indian Tiranga going up in Delhi, and how moved he was. And he was full of that passion and that excitement and the thrill. I could see goosebumps on his hands when he was telling the stories. I saw that, and I saw the discussions around our dining table when these issues were being discussed, the constitution was being discussed, politics was being discussed. So one of the reasons, not very convincing, but one of the reasons why I wrote this is I feel in the passage of these 70-odd years, somewhere that passion has gone. Somewhere the thrill and the excitement that the common citizen used to feel about our country, the idea of India, the constitution of India, is no longer there. I remember the words which my father used to quote to me. Some of you may know it. Wordsworth, while writing on the French Revolution, darling, you might remember this, he wrote, "Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven." So that is the kind of thrill I saw in my father's generation. Today, the Constitution has become a reference book on the libraries of universities and colleges. It has moved away to the periphery of our national consciousness. So I think I'm being presumptuous and maybe arrogant when I say that somewhere in my mind there was a need to bring the Constitution back into the centrality of our discourse, of our national discourse. I don't know if this book achieves that purpose, but I would request you to read it and try to get the spirit of the Constitution into our DNA, into our bloodstream, and understand that that is the foundation on which we are thriving, on which we are living. So it is a romantic and foolish presumption of mine, but somewhere I hope something comes out of it. Now, the structure of this book also I'd like to talk about. The Constitution has been, in my book, divided into 13 parts, 13 different subject matters. Just run through it. There's one chapter on the preamble, one on the federal structure, the relationship between center and state, one on the fundamental rights, one on the directive principles of state policy, the legislatures, the judiciary, and the executive. There's one separate chapter on trade and commerce, also leading to the affirmative action taken to raise people who have not been treated well in society. There is a whole chapter on the 42nd Amendment, which Mrs. Gandhi had brought in at the height of the emergency, and certain actions were taken to thwart the Constitution in a way, and how that was set right. There is one chapter on the 73rd and 74th Amendment, and two very interesting chapters that you may be interested in. I did not know this. While writing the book, I realized that before 1950, before our Constitution came into existence, there are about 24, in fact 26 constitutional and legislative documents leading up to the Constitution. Some are British, some are Indian. One is Nehru's document, one is Sapru's document, Bal Gangadhar Tilak's document. I do not know any of this, but I have listed out about 26 such documents which led to the Constitution being created. And finally, there's one chapter on the writing, the physical aspect of writing of the Constitution, how the committees were created, the role of B.N. Rao, how the drafting of the separate articles of the Constitution came to be. So in a way, I think it tries to bring out a comprehensive picture of the Constitution, and I really hope that you do read it. Each of these 13 chapters has 3 components. There is one component which narrates the articles. What is the article about? There is a component which talks of the discussions in the Constituent Assembly. It was hotly debated. There was a great dialogue and debate going on, and finally they arrived at some consensus. So the Constituent Assembly discussions are also mentioned on each chapter. And finally, after the Constitution came into being, the Supreme Court of India has interpreted it They have challenged some, they have given nuanced interpretations, and that too is part of each of the 13 chapters. Now, very quickly, what are those elements of the Constitution that I find unique? I find unique to India. One, very, very important is the fact that with one stroke of the pen, all adults in the country got the right to vote. Before 1950, the voting population was hardly 30% of our eligible population. But 1950 onwards, all persons above 21, irrespective of sex, caste, creed, all of them got the voting right, which I think is, even a country like Switzerland gave voting rights to the women only in 1971, 20 years after India. So that I think was a really revolutionary step which the Constitution enforced. There is a chapter on the conflict between fundamental rights and directive principles. They are not complementary, they are not supplementary, they challenge each other. Another very important aspect which I have tried to highlight is we have this constitutional trinity: liberty, equality, fraternity. We borrowed it from the French Revolution and other constitutions. But in India, we took these three concepts under the umbrella of justice. Justice. You can have liberty, equality, fraternity, but where is justice? And this is the sole thought of Ambedkar, who realized that even though we may have liberty and equality and fraternity, justice has to be given to people who have suffered over the last 5,000 years. So this trinity is covered with this umbrella of justice. One more aspect and then I'll come to the conclusion. When the Constitution was being written, the members, 300 odd members of the Constituent Assembly, belonged to 5 caucuses, 5 groups. Just like we have groups in our parliament now, then also there were groups. The first group was what we call the liberal democratic vision of Nehru. Nehru got all his ideas from Europe. Liberal democratic vision, he put his inputs into it. Then there was the socialistic democratic vision of Ambedkar, who tried to put all issues related to the past history of some of our people. The third is what we call the non-modernist vision of Gandhiji. Gandhiji was nowhere in the Constituent Assembly, but his ideas were propagated by some of the members, the non-modernist, rural, village republic concept, which Nehru brought in. Number 4 is the egalitarian vision of the leftists, led by K.T. Shah. The leftists tried to put that equality, the concept of equality, deeper and deeper into the language of the Constitution. And finally, there was the Hindu view, led by people like Rajendra Prasad. Today we may say it's Hindutva, but there was a Hindu view also in the making of the Constitution. Now I will end here with just a couple of quotations, because I feel that any book on the Constitution must end with a warning. There's a warning inherent in every book of the Constitution. And that warning is that we cannot take it for granted. We cannot say it is always there, but we have to get engaged with that document completely. And unless we do that, we are at great peril. So I'm going to read out just 2 or 3 small quotations by Ambedkar himself. Once he said, and I quote, "We have a social system which is incompatible with the parliamentary system." Social system is fractured, hierarchical. It's not compatible with the parliamentary system. First statement. Second statement, it's a little long. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? The author of the Constitution himself being so skeptical about his own creation. And finally, the last quotation, constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. Democracy, and I underline this coming sentence, democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil which is essentially undemocratic. Though he said it in 1950, it rings very, very true even today, despite 70 years having passed. So that is why I said that every book on the Constitution must end with this warning, that we must be cognizant of the very fragile nature of our legacy. And as somebody said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We have to be completely vigilant of what is happening all around us. So for this book is therefore an attempt, to those who would like to read it, to make them understand the very precious nature of our democracy and to see what we can do to keep it alive and thriving. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mathew. It's now time for that very important part of this event, which is the release of the book. Our guests on the dais kindly unwrap the book and present it to us.
Dr. C.K. Mathew, Sri Shumsher Sharif, Dr. Sitharamam, Dr. Narayana, my distinguished colleagues, Sri P.K. Pradhan, Satish, Sri Joy Umanji, and of course, Dali Koshiji, with whom we worked many years together. In fact, a lot of memories, sir, and congratulations on this magnum opus. It's truly a seminal publication that will go into literature. I see a lot of young faces in this audience. How many of you have actually seen the Constitution and read it in the last 1 month? Quite a number of few hands. If you go to the 5th floor of this library, you'll find, as Mr. Sudesh took me to the 5th floor, there are a lot of copies of the Constitution of India and also a lot of volumes on the All India Reporter. As one who has reread it a number of times, in fact, over the past 35 years, I always kept a copy on my office table. And I was fascinated by reading of this document. And when Dr. Mathew sent me his book, I thought it was a phenomenal work, and I immediately put it on our IAS Rajasthan group also, that it's a magnum opus and a significant contribution to literature. Many of us have grown up reading D.D. Basu's Constitution of India, and you will find several articles on it where tremendous constitutional bench judgments and jurisprudence have been given. I have a written text, and I think it can be circulated, sir. Several aspects of it has been covered by you. In fact, I'm deeply privileged and appreciative of the Azim Premji University for inviting me to the book launch function of Dr. C.K. Mathew's book, Reviewing the Republic, Reflections on the Constitution of India. I'm happy to recall Dr. Mathew's contribution to the civil service in implementing complex public policies as Principal Secretary to Chief Minister, Additional Chief Secretary in the Finance Department, as Chief Secretary, Government of Rajasthan. He was one of the civil servants who fought pitched battles for good governance. And it was little surprise that post-retirement he was closely associated with benchmarking governance in the Public Affairs Center, and now as a visiting professor of the Azim Premji University. Let me highlight the life of the protagonist of the book and this book discussion. Dr. C.K. Mathew's contribution to good governance has been significant. I had met him when I was 22, about 35 years ago, and I followed his work closely. A part of the steel frame, he handled Rajasthan's famine and drought as Secretary Irrigation and improved justice delivery as member Board of Revenue at Ajmer. I could see his strong footprint in governance when I served as Chairman Board of Revenue in 2017-18. Senior advocates and litigants recalled his work and quest for justice. He was a man under whom the torch of justice burned bright. Impeccable integrity and commitment to the nation and nation building. I was very happy to be associated with the book launch function of his previous book research project with Azim Premji University, The Historical Evolution of the District Collector, a copy of which is also on the 5th floor library. Dr. C.K. Mathew's second book with the Azim Premji University, Reviewing the Republic, Reflections of the Constitution of India, is a magnum opus. It's deeply researched, It presents several contemporary judgments of the Supreme Court of India and the transformational impact of social legislation. Each of the book's 13 chapters make fascinating reading. Constitutional romanticism, as what Professor Sitharamam said, is a reality. And the Constitution of India evokes patriotism, commitment to nation building, and a deep sense of dedication to the national cause. Let me quote David Friedman, "Constitution is a visionary document, and when I think of it, it becomes romantic. It expresses eternal truths such as freedom, equality, liberty, and rule of law. These are normative principles, and constitutional questions tend to be packaged in terms of contemporary circumstances." Despite the romance surrounding it, given the massive struggle for independence and the years of independent thinkers in our country, the Constitution is also a very practical document. The grounding of the Indian Constitution in jurisprudence helps it to be a living document. It keeps moving constantly forward. And the Indian Constitution makers realized that rule of law should prevail in the country. And for the rule of law to prevail, individuals should not be subject to discretionary powers. The Constitution makers wanted the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary to function within a constitutional framework so that individuals are not subjected to discretionary powers. Dr. Mathew referred to the word "we the people." I'm sure all of you have read the preamble of the Constitution. Have you? The concept of "we the people" finds mention in the preamble. Parliament, state legislative assemblies, local self-governments represent the people, and conducting free and fair and credible elections are the cornerstone and lifeblood of democracy. Under Article 324, the Election Commission of India has an institutionalized mechanism in which every Indian above 18 has the right to vote. I'm sure some of you would have cast your votes. Have you? Have you cast a vote? How many of you are yet to cast a vote? Oh, there are several under 18 who are yet to cast a vote. I'm sure 2024 will give you an opportunity to cast a vote. The adult suffrage represents the only method by which absolute equality in political reality can be secured to every adult citizen. And it was also the best way in which a mandate of the parliament, a mandate to the state legislative assemblies and local bodies, where representatives can represent people as a whole. So free, fair, and credible elections conducted in a timely manner with the largest electorate in the world makes India the world's largest democracy and also the mother of democracy. As a young civil servant, when I joined service in 1989, we were preparing electoral rolls, identifying polling stations, implementing the provisions of the Representation of Peoples Act, addressing law and order situations, and putting in something like 18 hours a day of work, putting service above self for the cause of free, fair, and credible elections. And over the period of last 35 years, I've been part of a number of electoral processes and witnessed electoral reforms. I was part of the 1989, 91, 96, 99, 2004, then 2009, and 2014, and of course the last election of 2019, either as a district election officer or as an election observer in one constituency or the other. It's a fascinating area of work. And the functional responsibilities on individuals is enormous to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. Dr. Mathew has already quoted Dr. B.R. Ambedkar when he spoke of political equality and also the need to secure social and economic equalities. While the Constitution does not discriminate on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth, the state is not prevented from making any special provisions for advancement of socially and educationally backward classes or economically weaker sections, as well as for women and children. In fact, the state is entitled to do everything for the upliftment of the members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Article 17 is on the abolition of untouchability, presents the vision and experience of the Constitution makers' progressive legislation. The SC/ST Prevention Act of 1989 and the rules of 1995, legal enforcement powers were devolved to the National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes. The right to livelihood became an act and is one of the most significant changes, and a minimum of 100 days employment are guaranteed under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. In fact, 2003 marks 50 years of the unprecedented case of Keshavananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala and the doctrine of the basic structure. Have you read about this case? The preamble declares India as a sovereign democratic republic. The Supreme Court in the Keshavananda Bharati versus state of Kerala held that the preamble is a part of the Constitution, and the power to amend Constitution by Parliament must be exercised within the bounds of the Constitution, and it should not be exercised so as to destroy or abrogate the basic structure of the Constitution. So fundamental rights cannot be done away with. It forms a part of the basic structure of the Constitution. Federalism, secularism, democracy are principles of the basic structure. And it was a majority judgment, a 7-6 judgment, which said that the Parliament can amend every article in the Constitution, but the power of amendment is not absolute. And the fundamental features of the Constitution are what have been termed as the basic structure. So it basically includes supremacy of the Constitution, the rule of law, the independence of judiciary, the doctrine of separation of powers, the parliamentary system of government, and the principle of free, fair elections and the welfare state. In fact, the Keshavananda Bharati case is a guiding light for generations of judges, courts, civil servants, and has several important judgments have flown from it. The most recent being the National Judicial Appointments Commission case, where the Supreme Court decided on judicial independence issue. The second one was with regard to the 9-judge bench on the right to privacy, and the pleadings referred to the understanding on the fundamental rights of citizens under the Constitution. So this particular case has been discussed, written about, and cherished for over 50 years. The second important chapter of this book, which I found fascinating reading, was fiscal federalism. In fact, my mind went back to 1996 when I was co-opted by Mr. Sunil Arora, the then Chief Secretary to the Secretary to the Chief Minister, Mr. Bhairav Singh Shekhawat, into the Chief Minister's office in Rajasthan for a conclave of opposition chief ministers seeking greater devolution of central resources from the divisible pool. And at that time, the Rajasthan Chief Minister was asking for 29 to 32% devolution. Then we had the 14th Finance Commission report, which came in about, I think, in 2014, or the 14th Finance Commission, which recommended enhancement of tax devolutions. And suddenly, tax devolutions went up to 42%. And it enhanced the unconditional transfers to states. And there was a massive compositional shift. Otherwise, centrally sponsored programs mandated that the states had to commit a certain level of resources. The Planning Commission was abolished in 2015, and the Niti Aayog was established. It's one of Indian democracy's youngest institutions, with the mandate of imagining the developmental agenda and dismantling the old-style planning. It's also the words of cooperative federalism, many of you would have heard, where states come together to work for common good. The mandate of the Niti Aayog is to foster cooperative federalism and evolve national consensus on developmental goals. Then we had the Goods and Services Tax Act. So each of you who are paying any bill, you would be paying a GST surcharge. There's a central GST, there's a state GST. In fact, when Mr. Mathew and I were working together, we were still in the good old days of sales tax. From sales tax, the nation has seen a transformation to value-added tax, and from value-added tax to the goods and services tax. So that has been the journey that we've covered. And today, the GST represents one of the most comprehensive legislations in creating a single market. So if you see the futuristic institutions that India has created for fostering federalism, you'll find the Niti Aayog and the GST Council. These, coupled with Lokpal and our quest for a zero tolerance to corruption approach, will help the nation achieve its strategic objectives in the Amritkal period. It's also important that I deal with the constitutional provisions with regard to the services of persons who are serving the union or the state. Many of you would be writing the civil services. Are you appearing for the civil service examination? Any of you? Okay. Only one hand. That's it? It's not a popular discourse. You must read the Article 309 of the Constitution. Article 309 has one of the largest commentaries. In fact, when I was reading the report of the Second Administrative Reforms Commission, the second ARC's recommendation was Article 309 should be further strengthened, while Article 310 and 311 should be merged into Article 309. Article 309 has one of the largest commentaries in terms of Supreme Court judgments, High Court judgments, more than 200, 300 pages only on that single article you can find. And Article 312 pertains to the All India services, of which Dr. Mathew, Dr. Sharif, Mr. Pradhan and I have served decades and have found great significance and relevance of Article 312. And there are two more services which are part of it in addition to the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Forest Service and the Indian Police Service. Because there is an exchange of officers between the center and state. You serve in the state, go to the center, take the best practices from the center and come back to the states and ensure the state cadres are enhanced. There are also officers who take a number of grassroots initiatives from states and translate it into national government. Antyodaya was one such, which emanated from Rajasthan, was translated into Government of India and adopted into a number of practices like the Integrated Rural Development Program. So there was the other one, the Right to Employment Act, which Maharashtra pronounced, which led into the translation into the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Generation Act. So Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the father of India's civil service, said in 1949 in his first address to the civil servants at Metcalfe House, said that your predecessors were brought up in the traditions in which they kept themselves aloof from the common run of people. It will be our bounden duty to treat the common men in India as your own. So a transformation in terms of civil service was envisaged, and Prime Minister Modi has often urged civil servants to adopt a nation first, always first approach to nation building. The institutional legacy, as also the sustenance, is largely based on the vigor and enthusiasm that individual civil servants have shown while serving in various institutions. We must contribute to strong institutions and which have significant institutional legacy. If you look at the Central Secretariat Manual of Office Procedure, I saw the document that Curzon wrote in 1899. And as we try and reform the Central Secretariat, several features have changed, particularly this digital march of the Central Secretariat has been a singular reform that I have witnessed. Institutions must also be built by sound value systems, and employee empowerment is achieved by synergizing organizational objectives with individual aspirations. Let me also conclude by saying that the Indian Constitution has very high moral tones, and those who won freedom for India and created the constitutional system were men of rare talents and dedication. And India's constitutional values, deeply rooted in high moral tones with a universal dimension. Let me quote Acharya Kriplani from one of the constitutional debates. I want this House to remember that what we have enunciated are not merely legal, constitutional, and formal principles, but moral principles, and moral principles have got to be lived in life. They have to be lived, whether it is commercial life, political life, or the life of an administrator. They have to be lived throughout. These things we have to remember if the Constitution is to succeed. I did have the opportunity to go through 10 of the 13 chapters of your book, sir. 3 chapters I could not go through, so I didn't comment on the constitutional formulation of the thinking on the constitutional makers beyond a limited extent. I'll add to this version and actually give you a comprehensive book review. Let me commend this book to each student of Azim Premji University, and I am sure it would be a very valuable addition to the literature on constitutionalism of India. It's not easy to write a book of this magnitude, and my compliments to Dr. C.K. Mathew ji on this momentous occasion. Please join me in giving him a big hand. Heartiest congratulations, and we look forward to a lot of readership. Thank you, sir.
Requesting our guest of honor, Shri Shumsher Sharif, to please share his thoughts.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I must first begin, as is usually expected, to thank everybody, particularly those on the dais, my colleague and batchmate, Dr. C.K. Mathew. Of course, I should have started as per protocol with the state, which is Mr. Srinivas, who is the current Secretary to the Government of India and of a very important department, whom we used to dread because he manages the civil service from every aspect: promotions, demotions, sacking, awards, etc. And speaking of awards, I think what you did miss, if I may add, is not many of you know that we civil servants are treated as, you're really dumb guys who just stick to books and stuff like that. But here you have a badminton champion of national stature. He has won many awards as the junior national badminton champion, many state awards. His son is a prominent cricketer, and I think you've led a very sporting life and a great career. Dr. C.K. Mathew needs no introduction, and I would like to address Mr. Sitharamam Kakarala, and of course, Mr. Narayana, who would be also moderating the discussion, and above all, for the arrangements that Azim Premji University has made for my stay, particularly Ms. Chandrika Moderator, and of course my escort, who had come early in the morning and escorted me over here. I was, of course, looking forward to staying in the university, but that didn't materialize. But anyway, having said all these things, I have something to confess. I had a root canal operation just a week ago. And I asked my doctor, I said, I have to go to Bangalore and I have to speak. And do you think, you can get these stitches off, and can I go? And can I speak? So he pertinently asked me this. He said, what are you going to speak on? So I hesitatingly said, there's a talk on the Constitution. He said, no, there's no problem. You can go, but don't speak. If that's the subject. So I shall defy his orders and try and say something over here. Thank you for that very generous introduction also. But then let me also confess I have some connection with universities. I started my career before I joined the civil service as a lecturer. But guess what? I was slotted to teach in an all-girls college. So I noticed not many of you wanted to join the civil service. But I tell you, that's what motivated me, because I said, I can handle anything, but I cannot handle a bunch of all-girls college. And that's what motivated me to sort of do something else. Anyway, so life has been great. It's done me many favors, done many assignments, both here and abroad. Nothing to regret. Coming to the book, the title, of course, as you've just been told, is Reflections and a Review. But like most of you have vehicles, and there's this rear view mirror that you have. And what is written in that? It's written in that, the objects may be closer than you think. And that's precisely what it is with this Constitution. It may look as if it had come through a very long process, etc., but it's always there. And it's always there behind you, even if you have not read it. By the way, that reminds me, have you read your book? 600 pages, it's huge. I tried to read most of it, You know? So I presume that CK has read. And so have my batchmates, both Oman and PK. And I noticed one who has always been a frontline, you know, but he's today sitting at the back bench, Sudhir. So that's Sudhir's sitting right there at the back. But this is a very interesting period of our life, particularly as citizens of our country. 2 books have come out back to back. One is CK's book, and the other is by Fali Nariman. Just the other day, I happened to meet him, and the book is called Know Your Constitution. Now, it obviously asks you, why is it that such a thing is coming about? Why is it that people want to know, or why is it that people believe that the Constitution defines our lives, defines, you know, what we are and what we hope to be? And that is where the real strength of this Constitution lies, not in its volume, not in its jargon, not in the fact that it's a legal-dominated book on constitutional affairs. Having said all that, I don't want to go over what my colleague here has already spoken of in the form of the chapters, and CK has addressed all that. But just a few general comments, and since I've served in 3 capacities, I have 3 different perspectives, if you may say, to the Constitution. One is from the point of view of the President, one is from the point of view of the Vice President, one is the point of view of the legislature. And as a bureaucrat, of course, you know, you're at the base level of all 3. So the structure of the book is very interesting, because what has been done is taken the articles of the Constitution, married it up with the judicial pronouncements, which gives you a sense of reality of what was intended and what has actually, how it has been interpreted. And I'll come back to this issue of interpretation in a little while. But we must recognize the fact that the Constitution, as was rightly pointed out, has evolved. It has evolved. It is not something that was just written and given to you and said, here it is. It has evolved. It has evolved through a variety of reports. I mean, you go back to Bal Gandhar Tilak, you go back to Sapru, you go to in fact, the first attempt to write a constitution was in 1885, as early as 1885, a constitution for India, long before the British even left. So it's not something that just came about overnight, and therefore we say, what, these guys, I mean, they didn't address everything, limited constituent members of the Constituent Assembly. How could they have known what is going on? No, it's a document. In fact, I think it's perhaps the only document in our country today which is perhaps the most, you know, relevant, if you may call it, right? Something that you really need to read on at some point of time, you know. Get on with your exams, but do read it. Because there is something in it which every Indian should know, and what Fali has written about Know Your Constitution, what CK has labored to put in all those 600 pages. Now, I would just like to draw your attention, ladies and gentlemen, to one little thing, that you see, our Constitution has evolved, as I said, and it's through a movement. The movement had 2 aspects to it. One was political, and the other was social. The political aspect, as you all know, we struggled, we had the independence movement, etc., etc. But during that, a number of social issues were raised, and those got reflected in our Constitution. And having had the privilege of reading the original documents when I was in Parliament, I used to call very often when I was asked to give certain advice or comment or whatever it is, I would call for the original file. I would say, no, bring me Nehru's file, bring me Sir B.N. Rao's file, so that I could read. And you'll be surprised. I'm sorry, I'm going a bit offbeat, but these are things that will never be written about. You know, when our Constitution was being written, you had people like Dr. Rajendra Prasad, you had Dr. Rafi Ahmad Kedwai, you had, you know, big luminaries that you will read about. And Dr. Rajendra Prasad used to write his comments in Hindi and in little scraps of paper, which formed the articles of our Constitution. What they could put down in one paper today, I don't think people can put down in a dozen pages. We are so verbose, we are not precise, because they spoke through their heart, they spoke knowing their people, we the people. What is sovereign? What is sovereign is not the executive or the bureaucracy or the judiciary or parliament. What is sovereign is your constitution, right? And they knew that, and they put things into that. So the constitution evolved through a movement. Now, why I point this out to you is, if you read, and you'll have lots of books upstairs in the library to read about this, is that world over, you go to Europe, constitutions were formed how? After revolutions. You had revolutions in Europe in, 1848 and so on and so forth, French Revolution. Even the Magna Carta. Can you believe it? We all talk about the Magna Carta. It did not last more than 3 months. After 3 months, it was overthrown. The Magna Carta was drawn up, and in 3 months they dismantled it. So when we talk about the Magna Carta, it didn't survive 3 months. Average life of a constitution, as has been documented after the Second World War, when, of course, decolonization took place, is 17 years. That's all the constitution averages world over. Ours has survived. So you've got to ask yourself the question, why? What is it? So you go back to the people who wrote it and who defined it. They knew their people, and that's why they put it in over there. And so Gandhiji's contribution through non-violence added to that. And don't forget, by the time we actually adopted it, November 49 to January 1950, what were we going through? We were going through partition. You just imagine people getting killed, 1 million people dying, refugees, wars, a state that is being attacked all by, and the people who were leaving no stone unturned to leave you in limbo. Right? Now it's a different story today that Churchill would be turning in his grave that Mr. Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of Britain. In less than, so what he hoped never really happened. Or for that matter, even the Rashtrapati Bhavan, it was opened in what, the first, I think, document signed there was 1931. 1947 they had left. So, I mean, so please understand that in 1949-50, you were writing a constitution not pre-independent. You were writing a constitution in the middle of a mayhem, a partition. Put yourself in that place and think and read his book, and you will see how much balance, how much harmony, how much goodwill, and how much, above all, knowing your people. That is why we start the thing by we the people. They are supreme. Nobody else is supreme, The Constitution is supreme. So that is very important to remember while you study this whole subject. Now, obviously the Constitution is shown in its drafting and its thing. It's flexible. It's flexible. It's not watertight, 10 commandments that you can't change it, It's something that gives you that momentum to be able to change and to adapt as you evolve and as you go along. Of course, talking about going along, etc., the animosity and polarization that I see taking place today is perhaps one of the biggest drawbacks and one of the biggest fears. It is this polarization that could destroy the Constitution. It is this animosity that could destroy the Constitution. And this is where the role of the President and the Vice President comes into play. They have a responsibility, and in fact, the President's oath and the Governor's oath is totally different to the oath taken by the Prime Minister or anybody else. Their oath, as you all know, is to protect and defend the Constitution. So therefore, the Constitution is not something that you can just dismantle. And they have a responsibility to do this. So that is, I think, a very important part of our Constitution. Now, the backbone of the Constitution is its legislation. And I speak to you, having been Secretary General, that it is legislation which actually is the backbone of the Constitution, apart from the fact that it maintains harmony and balance. But one of the things which have come up recently, and that will bring me to a current situation in the Constitution itself, is the legislative intent. I've had a number of judges, Supreme Court and High Court, talk to me, particularly when they're adjudicating cases, informally at times, asking me that, look, we are supposed to decide this case, but we are trying to look through your parliamentary debates and we find nothing. So how do you expect us to pass? I would tell them that why are you sometimes passing judgments without even looking at the world around you? And they would counter me with this. They said, look, it's very well for you to say this. Of course, this is all very informal. You know, we couldn't do it in court. I'd get hauled up for contempt of court. Might still do, one never know. So it turned out, he said, when we asked, by why was this legislation made? Blank. Nobody said anything. Disruption. So it's very important that Parliament needs to discuss everything so that the people who have to interpret it, particularly the judiciary, particularly the executive, should know when we say go by the spirit of the Constitution. You know, I just hope they don't go literally by the word spirit, because the point is the spirit is much more than what is normally believed to be. The spirit is debates. Unless you know why people wanted that legislation. Can you imagine? I've got figures somewhere, I don't want to go over it. Sometimes legislations are passed 3 minutes, 1 minute. The maternal, what was that bill? There was the very important bill on health, maternal something, I'm forgetting what it is. I mean, it involves women, children, future generations, passed in 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I mean, this is not the way. So this Constitution provides, these judgments provide you an opening of where and how the Constitution actually works on ground. The articles of the Constitution are there. Fine. Interpretation is very important. And interpretation brings you to Parliament. Because, as somebody's put it, the 5 characteristics of a democratic parliament are representativeness, transparency, accountability, accessibility, and effectiveness. This is what makes a democratic parliament. Parliament changes take place. If you take a look at the parliament from the 1950s till say about the 70s, it was heavily dominated by an urban ethos. You'll be surprised, by an urban ethos. They were highly educated people, highly accomplished people who had come out of the national movement, highly qualified barristers and lawyers and advocates. And then, as things moved on, it has moved more towards the rural background. You take a look at the profiles of all the members of Parliament. Quite naturally, as a result of that, the interpretations have changed. Quite naturally, because of that, debates have come up. So it's not something that is watertight, that it's written there, therefore you have to just follow it exactly as it goes. So these changes are very important, and that's what the book brings out. Of course, at the end, I will mention something else. But it is very important to understand the profile of your representatives who determine how the Constitution is to be played out. One of the biggest drawbacks today in our system, without hesitation, is electoral finance. Of course, apart from corruption and criminal. The number of people who are elected who have criminal records. And of course, the election finance is such a big issue that the earlier we address it, the better it is. And I'm glad the Supreme Court has already seized with this matter. Now, as a federation, we keep hearing that India is a federation, but not defined in the Constitution. But that is one of its strengths, because our federation is, in a manner of speaking, asymmetrical. The states are equally empowered to do things as much as the center. So it is not a symmetrical federation. It is an asymmetrical federation where even the states have a role to play. I will now confine myself only to letting you know, because this is an area where perhaps not much is known. What is the role of the president and the vice president? I know Sudhi, CK, I'm sure you, and all of us have had the privilege of meeting various presidents and vice presidents during our service career, calling on them and etc. I remember one of my colleagues or during one of the calls on the Vice President, if you remember, from Punjab cadre, he asked him, "Sir, we've read the Constitution, but we don't know what your role is." You know, so you can imagine. And then when I joined and I worked at it, and I said, my God, you know, now I'm in the thick of it. So let me tell you, the role of the Vice President vis-a-vis the Constitution and the working of Parliament is twofold. It's not just cutting tapes and kissing babies and going for functions. He has a role as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha. And the chairman of the Rajya Sabha is a very important role because unlike elsewhere, he determines the pace and the content which the government provides him. Because every chairman will tell you that naturally, his prime duty is to see that government legislation works. Prime duty of Parliament is to legislate, and government legislation is priority. So it is his responsibility to see that government legislation passes, as much as it is his responsibility to see that every member of Parliament, whether he's a backbencher or in front, his rights and his privileges, I will not speak of Mahua Motra at this stage, so it's safeguarded. It's safeguarded. That is his role. And keeping that in mind, it's very important that he should ensure that the Parliament should work in harmony. Now the question is, how does he make it work in harmony? There are 20, 30 parties. How do you get them together? So a system has been worked out over the years, conventionally, that whenever Parliament meets, and even outside Parliament when it meets, the Vice President calls a daily meeting at 10 o'clock of all the leaders of parties, including the government, Minister for Parliamentary Affairs and the leader of the House and Opposition, to sit with him and go over the legislative business for the day. And the Secretary General provides, on the basis of whatever is produced, as to how much time can be allocated to each of them and what are the possibilities of getting it through. And it is there that you see actually how Parliament works internally. Because then he actually assists them in ensuring that the entire day's proceedings are conducted properly, and he leaves it to the Deputy Chairman to conduct it and the Secretary General to ensure that everything is done as per rules. Therefore, it's very important for the Chairman to be hands-on on the issues. What to admit, what not to admit, how to show them precedence. That's why your book is going to be very useful to them, let me tell you. And the result is that in the meeting there's a lot of give and take. And you'll find there's a lot of give and take. The government adjusts people. The opposition says, okay, we'll do what we want to do. We will criticize you. We'll do this. We'll do that. But we promise you we will pass all your bills. Because they realize the country is more important and these legislative work is important. So it's not what you see in those 35 minutes on television screen. Those television screens are just in passing. It's good to be able to put that up and express yourself. But before that, they've had a very serious discussion, decided on what they can, and that is where you also see and test as to whether the chairman tests whether the House will run or will it not run. Because some of the members will put their foot down and say, we will not allow the government to pass this. We just will not allow them to pass this. We will walk out, and now, of course, the tactic has come out to disturb it. Similarly, passing a bill merely through disruption robs the people, robs the judiciary, robs the executive of being able to understand why this is necessary. So that is one of the most important rights, roles of the Vice President. Now, the Ethics Committee, you've been reading about it every day on television, it's been coming. This actually was established by President Narayana when he was Vice President. And he got it across from UK, the Norton Report. But strangely enough, Lok Sabha did not adopt it. Rajya adopted it in 1993. I think Lok Sabha has adopted it sometime after 2000. Similarly, privileges. Privileges, nobody knows what are the privileges for a member of Parliament. They don't want it codified. They just don't want people to know what their privileges are. Because the more open you keep it, the more flexible it becomes. So privileges have not been codified at all. You could say it's a good thing, bad thing, whatever it is. But, there are gaps, these gaps are very important, where the presiding officer has to keep himself informed and monitor and see that Parliament works. Similarly, discussions are very important, and he has the right to disallow or to allow a discussion. Many vice presidents have allowed discussions to take place, despite the fact that the government says, no, we will not agree to a discussion. He has put his foot down and said, you will have to discuss this. And it has led to sort of some very good results. So how is he kept informed? He's kept informed just the way the president is kept informed of how government is running. All the principal cabinet notes involving economic matters, social matters, not security matters, are presented to him on the basis at the same time that the cabinet considers it. So no president or vice president can say he does not know what's going on. He knows exactly what is going on within the cabinet, so far as legislation is concerned. And state legislations come to him for confirmation. Now, similarly in matters of foreign affairs, he's kept regularly informed. It is a practice that the Prime Minister every fortnight calls on the President and briefs him whether Parliament is on or not on as to what is going on. This is an old British practice, and of course, whenever the President wants any information, which is enshrined in the Constitution, by the way. And there have been a number of instances, don't ask me to name them because it's all in public domain. Presidents have complained about Prime Ministers not keeping them informed and so on and so forth, but by and large I would say that every Prime Minister knows and does and maintains, irrespective of party dominations or party affiliation, they always maintain this. And this is one of the strengths of our Constitution. It's there. The President shall be kept informed. So he does know exactly what is going on, and it is his job, as Ivor Jennings said, to have the right to warn, to caution. And I know a number of instances where Prime Ministers have not just been cautioned, they've been asked to roll back some of their thinking. And they take it in the right spirit. They take it in the right spirit. There is this famous incident of President Narayana in Article 356, when he returned it. He returned it. I was the secretary at that time. I was horrified. I fell off my chair. I told him, I said, sir, this has never been done. You are stretching the Constitution to its limit. He said, but that's the way I feel about it. And what happened? The government, and the hats off to the Prime Minister, he put it before the cabinet. And he said, if the President has told us that something is wrong, I think we should respect his wisdom. So don't ever think that we are at a loss. There is always the Constitution which provides that anchor, and given in the hands of the head of state, it's a very solid anchor. And I saw this very close quarters because I had the opportunity of serving both these luminaries, right starting from Ayodhya through state elections, to 2 general elections, to Kargil, to the nuclear, tests, and beyond. And I can tell you the harmony between the President and the Prime Minister is immense. When nation comes, it's always nation first. It is always nation first. There is no disharmony. I'm not pitching for any other reason, but I'm telling you what I saw firsthand. So never feel dejected that things are not going okay, the media will write. Rightfully so, they have the right to write, make you think, etc. But there is never a situation where this harmony or balance is torpedoed. And if it moves in that direction, then I can tell you the Constitution, though it exists, will be in jeopardy. And if the Constitution is in jeopardy, I can tell you the nation is in jeopardy, because it contains so much. And therefore, I urge you not only to carefully read CK's book, but read the Constitution itself. and make your own decision. They're a generation that can counter-check anything. In our time, we didn't have a mobile phone. I mean, to have a fax machine was a big thing. So you have accessibility to so much information, and so judge for yourself and believe in yourself and believe in the Constitution. So I don't want to labor this beyond because there's a panel discussion. As I said, it is the Constitution that is sovereign. It will keep evolving. But what is important is you've got to safeguard institutions. Judiciary, Parliament, Election Commission, these are the institutions. And last but not least, you've got to believe in your executive. I remember one minister who's still a minister, when he first became minister, he asked me, he said, what do you make of this secretary that I'm going to have in my department? I said, if you trust him, he'll trust you. I said, the whole thing is trust, at bar. If you don't trust anybody, how will you do anything in life? We all make mistakes. You can roll back your mistakes. But if you begin on a note of suspicion, wherever you may be, it's just not going to work. I will only end by saying that, CK, you've done this book and you've done everybody a big favor, because what you've done is you have explored the crevices in the Constitution. There are those aspects, which is the judiciary and the Constitution. You've explored the crevices. Now, which I feel your book has left out. Am I doing the wrong thing by criticizing the book? Anyway, I'm not criticizing the book. All I'm saying is what is left out is a gap. And what is that gap? That gap is the debates of Parliament. I tried to do something very small at one time, which is I took some, there have been about 1,000 legislations which have been passed. Now, all the 1,000 legislations are not necessarily to be studied. There are so many of them are amending legislation, one word here and one word there. But there are some very principal legislations, There are legislations, right to food, right to this, right to that, etc., etc. The debates that have taken place, those are not in the public domain. And that is what you need to read. How did people tackle this situation, from which angles? And if you take a particular article of the Constitution. So what I did was, I took all the legislations that I could think of at that time, and because the debates are something that you cannot just find easily. So I had all the debates synopsized, because if you look at Parliament, and I'm sure you get all these papers on your desk regularly, every day, the Secretary General's job is of a slave, let me tell you. He's a slave and a creature of, babugiri. Okay, he has to do a lot of babugiri work. And one of the things he has to do is at the end of the day, he has to produce a synopsis of what happened in Parliament that day for legislation, and that too in about less than 300 words, right? So it's very concentrated drafting. But every day during Parliament, these debates are synopsized. So I put all the synopsis together, put it with the Bear Act, put it with the 2 bills, and presented it so that anybody who takes up any act of Parliament as a ready reckoner, you can actually not only go as he has done it with the judicial pronouncements, but you can actually go to the debate. Because ultimately the bill will get passed by ayes and noes. But that doesn't indicate to you the flavor of how the debate went. What were the issues that were raised? Because people in members, as Mr. Srinivas has pointed out, you go to the state, you come back to the center. MPs are doing this every day, every weekend. They go back to the constituency and they come back. So they come back to Parliament with real ground situation and real information, real data. And that is reflected in your debates, which, doesn't get reflected elsewhere, and certainly not in the media. So I would suggest that is an area that can be explored in certain and limited ways, not just for us, but even for our civil servants, to be able to understand what is this spirit of the legislation and spirit as he has done of the Constitution. With these few words, I thank you for giving me a very patient hearing.